Montana, 1875. A young woman stood in the town square frozen in 8 degrees below zero cold. 21 silver dollars. That was the price her mother had set to sell her to a brothel owner. But just when everything seemed over, a mysterious man emerged from the wilderness. He made an offer no one expected. And that was when the real story began. This is the true story of Emma Warren, the woman sold for $21 who chose freedom over submission. Montana, June 1918. Summer sun warmed the ridge where the wind sang through the pines like a hymn half remembered. Caleb Stone, 76 years old, with hands like weathered oak and eyes that had witnessed too much, rocked slowly in the chair he had built 43 years earlier. The wood remembered the shape of him. The mountains remembered his name. Beside him sat Lily, 22, his youngest granddaughter. Her hair caught the afternoon light the way her grandmother's once had. She twisted a handkerchief between nervous fingers, working up the courage to ask the question that had haunted her since childhood. "Grandfather," she said finally, the word barely louder than the breeze. "Is it true? Did you really buy grandmother with money?" The rocking stopped. Caleb's gaze drifted across the valley below where 3 generations of his family now lived in homes built by his sons. A hawk circled in the distance, patient and precise. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades. "Not buy, child, never buy. What I did was give her something no one else would. A choice." He turned to face her, and she saw the moisture gathering in those ancient eyes. "But the story is longer than that, much longer, and it begins on a day so cold the breath froze in your lungs before you could speak." He drew a long breath, and the years fell away from his voice. "It begins on a day when I learned that love is not about possession. It is about freedom. And sometimes freedom costs everything you have." Lily leaned forward and Caleb began. The world shifted, colors fading to the sepia tones of memory, and they were no longer sitting on the porch in 1918. They were standing in Virginia City, Montana, on the 14th day of February 1875 at precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, when the temperature hung at 8 degrees below zero and human decency disappeared entirely. Virginia City sprawled across the mountainside like a wound that refused to heal. 6 years past its gold rush prime, the town clung to survival through whiskey cards and the cruel mathematics of supply and demand. Snow lay 6 inches deep on the muddy streets. Smoke rose from 50 chimneys gray against a grayer sky. In the center of the town square, beneath the skeletal branches of a cottonwood tree that had witnessed a dozen hangings, Emma Warren stood perfectly still. 21 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, 118 pounds, most of it bone and stubbornness. Her dress, thin brown cotton, patched at the elbows, provided no protection against the cold that bit through to the marrow. But she did not shiver. She had learned long ago not to give them the satisfaction. 21 silver dollars. That was the price Helen Warren had settled on for her daughter. The coin sat in a leather pouch in Chester Blake's palm, and he weighed them with the casual expertise of a man who had purchased many things that should not be for sale. 48 years old, with a face carved by violence and greed, Chester owned the Red Lantern, the largest saloon between Helena and Butte. 3 scars ran from his left ear to his jawline, souvenirs from a knife fight in Denver that the other man had not survived. The pouch weighed exactly 1.4 pounds. Chester had counted twice. Helen Warren, 43 years old and hard as winter ground, counted a 3rd time. Her fingers moved with practiced speed, lips moving silently. The satisfaction on her face was not about the money, though $21 was more than most miners earned in a month. No, this was about something deeper and darker. This was about finally being rid of the daughter who had committed the unforgivable sin of being young while Helen grew old. Behind Helen stood Walter Finch, her second husband, Emma's stepfather. 45 years old and hollow-eyed, he stared at the snow-covered ground as if the frozen earth might offer some escape from his complicity. His hands trembled, but not from cold. He knew this was wrong. He had always known. But Walter Finch was a man who had spent his entire life choosing the path of least resistance, and Helen Warren was a force that carved canyons through stone. 40 or 50 townspeople had gathered, drawn by the spectacle like crows to carrion. Miners in dirt-crusted wool, drifters with nowhere to go and nothing to lose. 2 women clutched their shawls tight, faces twisted with pity, but neither spoke. Speaking meant involvement, and involvement meant risk. In the back of the crowd, Mrs. Patterson, 67 years old and bent by arthritis, wept openly. She had taught Emma to read when the girl was 7 before Helen found out and forbade it. Mrs. Patterson knew what this girl could have become. But knowing changed nothing. 2 drunken men near the front laughed with the cruel hilarity of those who have abandoned all pretense of humanity. $21. One shouted, his words slurred. Hell, I'd pay 15 for Chester's girls any day. His companion joined the laughter, and the sound echoed off the false-fronted buildings like a curse. Chester Blake smiled, showing teeth stained brown from tobacco and neglect. Well now, Helen, seems we have a deal. The girl comes with me, you take your money, and everyone walks away satisfied. Helen's face was stone. No second thoughts lived there. No maternal instinct stirred in those cold eyes. She had made her calculations years ago, and Emma Warren had always come up short. Too plain, too sharp-tongued, too much her father's daughter, that first husband who had the audacity to die and leave Helen with a child she never wanted. She eats too much, Helen announced to the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone reading scripture. Works wrong, talks back, takes up space meant for better people. At least now she'll be useful. Walter flinched but said nothing, never said anything, never would. Chester reached for Emma's arm, his fingers closing around her wrist like a manacle. Time to earn your keep, girl. Properly this time. Emma did not cry, did not beg, did not plead. She had learned that tears only encouraged them. Instead, she looked at her mother, searching those familiar features for even the smallest flicker of doubt or regret. She found nothing. Helen's face held only relief, the expression of a farmer who had finally sold off a lame horse. The crowd pressed closer, their breath fogging in the frozen air, turning her pain into entertainment for a Tuesday morning. Then Emma spoke. Her voice cut through the cold air like a blade, clear and precise and utterly calm, the kind of calm that comes when there is nothing left to lose. You are not selling me because we are poor, Mother. You are selling me because you hate me. The town square fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Chester's grip on her arm loosened slightly in surprise. Helen's face flushed red rage and shock, warring for dominance. You are not selling me because I am worthless. Emma continued, her voice never rising, never breaking. You are selling me because I remind you of what you will never be again. Young, alive, capable of being loved. Helen's hand cracked across Emma's face with the sound of a pistol shot. Blood welled at the corner of Emma's mouth, a single dark drop that fell to the white snow and bloomed there like a winter flower. Ungrateful wretch! Helen's voice shook with fury. I fed you for 21 years, clothed you, kept a roof over your ungrateful head. Emma touched her bleeding lip, then looked at her fingers as if the blood belonged to someone else. When she met her mother's eyes again, her voice was quieter, but somehow more terrible. No, you locked me in the cellar for 3 days when I was 10 years old. You burned the only book I ever loved when I was 12. And when Mr. Baker wanted to marry me at 18, you told him I was insane, that I had tried to kill myself. You did not raise me, Mother. You tortured me. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Several people looked away, suddenly interested in their boots or the sky or anything that was not the truth being spoken aloud in the center of town. Mr. Baker. The name hung in the frozen air like an accusation. He had been a good man, a carpenter with steady hands and kind eyes. He had loved Emma in that simple, honest way that small-town romances are built on, and Helen had destroyed it with lies as casual as swatting a fly. Chester Blake watched this exchange with the cold calculation of a predator studying wounded prey. His mind worked through the implications. This girl had backbone, spirit. The ones who fought back always earned more money from the men upstairs at the Red Lantern. They paid extra for resistance, for the illusion of conquest. He caught the eye of Deputy Frank Morris, 35 years old and morally hollow, who stood at the edge of the crowd with a tin star pinned to his coat and loyalty that could be purchased for the price of a bottle. Chester nodded toward the wagon waiting at the end of the street. Then from the shadows behind the supply wagon, a figure emerged. The crowd parted without being told. Something in the way he moved demanded space. Not aggressive, not threatening, but absolutely certain. The walk of a man who had spent so long in the wilderness that he had forgotten how to doubt his place in the world. Caleb Stone was 33 years old, though the mountains had aged him beyond his years. 6 feet 1 inch tall, 180 pounds of leather and sinew and quiet competence. He wore a buckskin coat patched in 7 places, each repair done with the meticulous care of someone who understood that in the wilderness a poorly sewn seam could kill you. His beard, more gray than brown, was trimmed close at the chin. A hunting knife with a 12-inch blade hung from his belt, the handle worn smooth by years of use. His shoulders were broad, but slightly curved, the posture of a man who had carried heavy burdens across vast distances. His eyes, deep brown and impossibly sad, held the weight of someone who had seen too much death and not enough joy. He carried a bundle of furs over his left shoulder. 60 pounds of prime grizzly and wolf pelts, each skin perfectly preserved. The kind of furs that fetch top dollar in Helena or even Denver. Sheriff Thomas Burke, 52 years old and corpulent with corruption, actually stumbled backward when he saw who had arrived. His face went white, then red, then white again. Stone. The name came out as half question, half curse. You are still alive. Caleb did not answer, did not even acknowledge the sheriff. He simply walked forward with that steady, unhurried pace and stopped directly in front of Chester Blake. The movement forced Chester to release his grip on Emma's arm. For 5 long seconds, the two men stared at each other. The crowd held its breath. Chester spoke first, his voice edged with mockery, designed to hide uncertainty. "Mountain man, what brings you crawling back to Civilization Town has nothing for your kind." Caleb set the bundle of furs on the ground. It landed with a heavy thump that made several people nearby step back. He straightened slowly, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured, the kind of voice that did not need to be loud to be heard. "If the girl is as worthless as this woman claims, then I will take her." Silence. Absolute and total silence. Even the wind stopped. Helen recovered first, her laughter sharp and ugly. "You, a man who lives like an animal, you have nothing we want." Caleb did not look at Helen. He kept his eyes on Chester, and something in that steady gaze made the saloon owner's smile falter. $200, Caleb said, nodding toward the furs. "Market value, Helena prices, 10 times what he is offering." The number hit the crowd like a physical blow. $200. In 1875, that was 6 months' wages for a skilled laborer, a year's income for a farmhand. Helen's eyes widened, greed warring with her hatred of her daughter. Chester's face darkened with rage. "This is not an auction, mountain man. The deal is made." But Caleb had already turned away from him. He looked at Emma for the first time, and the directness of his gaze struck her like a slap. Not with cruelty, not with hunger or calculation, or any of the looks she had learned to recognize and fear in men's eyes. His eyes held something she did not have a name for, something that made her chest tighten and her breath catch. Respect. That was the word. He looked at her with respect. "You can walk away right now if you want," Caleb said, his voice gentle but clear enough for everyone to hear. "No one will stop you. But if you come with me, I promise you this. No one will ever treat you as property again. Not me, not anyone." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands trembled. For 21 years, no one had ever asked her opinion about anything that mattered. No one had ever given her a choice that was actually hers to make. She looked at Chester Blake at the Red Lantern in the distance, where women's screams sometimes echoed through the night. She looked at her mother, at that face twisted with satisfaction and avarice. She looked at Walter, who could not even meet her eyes. Then she looked back at Caleb Stone, at this strange man who had emerged from the wilderness with an offer that made no sense and a promise that seemed impossible. 15 seconds passed. They felt like 15 years. Emma nodded once, a single movement of her head barely perceptible, but it was enough. Caleb turned and began walking toward the edge of town, toward the tree line where the wilderness began and civilization ended. Emma followed. She did not look back, did not say goodbye, simply walked one foot in front of the other, away from everything she had ever known. Chester Blake's voice exploded behind them. "Stop! You cannot just take her." Deputy Frank Morris moved to block their path, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. A Colt Peacemaker .45, 6 rounds, well maintained. Morris was not bright, but he knew how to use a gun. "Hold it right there, Stone." Morris's voice tried for authority but landed somewhere near panic. "This deal is not finished." Caleb did not slow his pace, but his right hand shifted almost imperceptibly toward the knife at his belt. Not a threat, just readiness. The kind of automatic response that comes from surviving too many situations where hesitation means death. "Morris, shoot his leg." Chester's command rang out across the square. "Bring him down." The deputy's hand closed around his gun grip. The crowd scattered like startled birds. Mrs. Patterson covered her mouth with both hands. Helen watched with eager eyes, already calculating how to profit from whatever came next. Then Pastor Green stepped between them. 58 years old, thin as a rail, white hair wild beneath his black hat. Pastor Green had served this town for 23 years, burying the dead and baptizing the living and trying to find God's grace in a place that seemed to have been forgotten by heaven. He planted his boots in the snow and spread his arms wide, making himself an obstacle that Morris would have to shoot through to reach Caleb. "No." The word came out firm, brooking no argument. "This transaction violates God's law. A mother selling her child. A man buying a woman for his brothel. If you shoot deputy, you will have to explain your actions to the Almighty, and I do not think he will be pleased with your answer." Morris hesitated, gun half drawn. He was many things, most of them bad, but he had been raised Baptist, and some childhood fears never fully fade. His eyes darted to Chester, seeking direction. Chester cursed long and creatively, but he knew when a fight could not be won. Not here, not now. Not with the entire town watching and a man of God standing witness. He would lose too much political capital, and political capital was the only currency that mattered more than actual currency. "Fine," Chester spat. "Take her, but this is not over, Stone. Not by half." Caleb and Emma disappeared into the tree line. The pines swallowed them like the wilderness reclaiming its own. The crowd began to disperse, already reshaping the story they would tell in saloons and kitchens across Virginia City for months to come. Chester Blake stood in the empty square, his fists clenched so tight that his knuckles cracked. Deputy Morris approached cautiously, like a dog uncertain of its master's mood. "You want me to follow them? Find out where he took her?" "Oh, yes." Chester's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Follow them, find his cabin, learn his routine. I want to know everything. When he sleeps, when he hunts, when he takes a piss, everything." Morris nodded and hurried toward the stable. Chester watched him go, then turned and walked back toward the red lantern, already planning. Inside his private room above the saloon, Chester unlocked a cedar box he kept beneath the floorboards. He lifted the lid and removed a photograph, the image sepia-toned and creased from handling. It showed a young man in Union Army blues, rifle in hand, standing beside a tent. The man's face was harder than in youth, but the eyes were unmistakable. "Caleb Stone," Chester whispered to the empty room. "I remember you. I remember what you did in the war, and I will use it." He smiled at the photograph, at the ghost of the man who had once killed for money and orders. Chester had been there. Chester knew. And when the time was right, he would make sure the entire territory knew what kind of monster Emma Warren had chosen to follow into the wilderness. But that would wait. For now he had other business to attend to. He placed the photograph back in the box and locked it carefully. Some weapons were best kept sharp and secret until the moment they were needed. The first day of the journey passed in silence. Emma walked 10 paces behind Caleb, and neither spoke. The temperature had risen slightly to 6 degrees below zero, but the cold still pressed against them like a living thing with teeth and claws. They traveled 6 miles through snow that came up to their knees. The pines rose 60 to 80 feet on either side, casting shadows black as ink. Wind howled through the peaks above, a sound like wolves mourning their dead. Emma shivered constantly, her thin dress providing about as much protection as tissue paper. But she did not complain, did not ask to rest, did not speak at all. Pride or perhaps terror kept her silent. After 3 hours, Caleb stopped beside a frozen stream. The water lay locked beneath 6 inches of ice, but he found a place where the current still moved beneath the surface. He broke through with the handle of his knife and filled a tin cup. He handed it to Emma without a word. She took it, surprised by the gesture. The water was so cold it hurt to drink, but she drained the cup anyway. Her hands shook when she handed it back. Caleb studied her for a moment, his eyes moving over her inadequate clothing with clinical assessment. Then he shrugged off his outer coat and held it out. "Put this on. Tonight drops to 20 below. You will not survive in that dress." Emma stared at the coat like it might be a trap. She had learned that kindness was always a trap. "What about you?" The words came out rougher than she intended, scraped raw by cold and emotion. "I am used to it. You are not." She took the coat. It was heavy, lined with rabbit fur on the inside, and still warm from his body. She pulled it on and immediately felt the difference. The shivering slowed, but did not stop entirely. They walked another 3 miles before Caleb stopped again. The sun was setting, turning the snow pink and orange, and the temperature was plummeting fast. He began setting up camp with the efficient movements of someone who had done this 1,000 times. First, he cleared a space down to bare ground, brushing away snow with his hands. Then he built a fire ring with stones from the frozen stream. He gathered dead wood, the dry branches that the pines shed naturally, and arranged them with precise care. Fire was not just comfort, it was survival. He struck flint to steel, and sparks caught in the tinder. Within 5 minutes, flames crackled merrily, throwing heat and light into the gathering darkness. Then he built a shelter. Not for himself, for Emma. 4 wooden poles driven into the frozen earth, draped with tanned leather and secured with rawhide cord. Small but effective, positioned 8 feet from the fire, close enough for warmth but far enough to be private. Emma watched in silence as he worked, and something shifted in her chest. This was not the behavior of a man who had purchased property. This was something else entirely. When the shelter was complete, Caleb spread a thick bearskin on the ground inside and nodded toward it. "Sleep there. I will be outside if you need anything." "Where will you sleep?" He pointed to a simple tarp stretched between 2 trees open to the elements on 3 sides. "There." "But it is freezing." "I know." "Why?" For the first time since they left town, something like emotion flickered across his face. "Because you need space. You need to know you are safe, and you will not feel safe if I am close." Emma opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. He was right. She would not feel safe. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the fact that he understood that he cared about that, meant something she could not quite name. She climbed into the small shelter and wrapped herself in the bearskin. It smelled of smoke and pine and something wild, but not unpleasant. Through the gap in the leather wall she could see Caleb settling under his tarp with just a thin blanket. Night fell completely. The temperature dropped and dropped and dropped. Emma lay awake, her hand wrapped around a small knife she had stolen from Helen's kitchen days ago. She listened to every sound, every crack of a branch, every whisper of wind, expecting at any moment for him to come for her. 2 hours passed, then 3. Nothing happened. Then she heard it, soft, almost inaudible beneath the wind. A voice, Caleb's voice, singing, "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird. And if that mockingbird don't sing, Papa's gonna buy you a diamond ring." The lullaby drifted through the frozen night, and Emma felt something break open inside her chest. She had not heard anyone sing to her since she was 4 years old before her father died, and Helen's kindness died with him. She pressed her face into the bearskin to muffle the sound of her crying, not crying from fear or anger or despair, though she had cried those tears before. This was something different, something that hurt worse because it was unfamiliar. This was the first time in 17 years that someone had shown her kindness without wanting something in return. And it terrified her more than any threat ever had, because she did not know what to do with kindness, did not know how to hold it without crushing it, did not know if she was even capable of accepting it. The song faded. The night grew colder, and Emma cried until exhaustion finally pulled her under into dreams that were for once not nightmares. The second day dawned clear and bitter. The sun rose like a distant promise, offering light but precious little warmth. Caleb was already awake when Emma emerged from the shelter, moving stiffly, every muscle protesting. He had tea brewing, real tea, not the bitter bark substitutes that most frontier settlers had to make do with. He poured a cup and handed it to her without comment. She wrapped her hands around the warm tin and breathed in the steam before drinking. "Thank you," she said. The first word she had spoken since they left town yesterday. Caleb nodded but did not respond. He packed the camp with the same efficient precision he had used to build it, erasing nearly all evidence they had been there. Emma watched and learned. In the wilderness, she was beginning to understand survival was about paying attention to 10,000 small details. They walked. The sun climbed higher, but provided little comfort against the cold. After an hour, Caleb stopped and cut a walking stick from a young aspen, trimmed it smooth, and handed it to Emma. "This will help with balance. Snow hides rocks and holes. A twisted ankle out here is a death sentence." She took the stick. Their fingers brushed, and she flinched instinctively. He withdrew his hand immediately, his face carefully neutral. She felt ashamed of her reaction, but did not know how to apologize. By midday, they had covered another 6 miles. Emma was exhausted, but determined not to show it. She kept pace, kept silent, kept moving. Then her foot caught on a buried branch, and she went down hard, landing face first in the snow. The cold shocked the breath from her lungs. She lay there for a moment, stunned and humiliated. Caleb's hand appeared in her field of vision, palm up, waiting. Not grabbing, not demanding, just offering. She looked up at him, saw something that might have been concern in his eyes, and took his hand. He pulled her to her feet with surprising gentleness. "Snow hides things," he said, echoing his earlier warning. Then, after a pause, "Everyone falls. What matters is getting back up." Emma brushed snow from her face and clothes, trying to reclaim some dignity. "I was not built for this, for hunting and surviving and all of this." "Good thing you do not need to hunt, then. You just need to walk. I have fallen 3 times today, and gotten up 3 times. That is what matters." Despite everything, despite the cold and the exhaustion and the fundamental strangeness of her situation, Emma laughed. It burst out of her before she could stop it, a sharp bark of surprised humor that echoed through the trees. Caleb blinked, startled. Then something extraordinary happened. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. The first break in his serious expression since they had met. "There," he said quietly. "That is the first time you have laughed in years, I would wager. 3 years, since my father died. That is too long without laughter." They walked on, and somehow the silence between them felt different. Less like walls and more like companionship. The third day brought them to a frozen lake, its surface smooth as glass and white as bone. Caleb stopped at the shore and stood there for a long moment, his gaze distant and sad. Emma waited, unsure if she should speak or stay quiet. Finally she asked, "Is this place special to you?" Caleb nodded slowly. "I met my wife here, 8 years ago. Right there, actually." He pointed to a stand of pines on the far shore. "She was picking berries. I was tracking an elk. We nearly collided. She dropped her basket and berries went everywhere, and I helped her pick them up." He paused, lost in memory. She laughed at my clumsy apologies. I fell in love with that laugh before I even learned her name. Emma's chest tightened. "Your wife, Anne, she died 3 years ago, 1872, along with our daughter Rose. Scarlet fever took them both in 3 days." His voice was flat, drained of emotion by the weight of repetition. This was a story he had told himself too many times. Anne was 28. Rose was 7. Emma stood beside him, suddenly understanding so much. The cabin half built and then abandoned. The 3 years of isolation. The lullaby he sang to ghosts in the darkness. "I am sorry," she said, knowing the words were insufficient but needing to offer something. "After they died, I could not stay in town. Every street corner reminded me, every Sunday hymn, every child's laugh. So I came up here. I thought the mountains might be quiet enough to let me forget." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were ancient with grief. "But you never forget. You just learn to carry it." Emma did something she had never done with anyone who was not threatening her. She reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. Just rested it there, offering the only comfort she knew how to give. Physical presence. Proof that he was not alone, even if just for this moment. Caleb did not pull away, did not flinch. He stood there beneath her hand, and for 30 seconds they shared the weight of loss between them. "Why did you offer to take me?" Emma asked quietly. "Why not just walk away? You owe me nothing." "Because," Caleb said, his voice rough, "I saw myself, 20 years ago, trapped, powerless, and I thought maybe if I could give you a choice, give you freedom, maybe that would balance the scales a little. Maybe that would make up for some of the things I have done that cannot be undone." "What things?" But Caleb shook his head. "Another time, when you know me better. When you trust me enough to hear the truth and not run." They walked on, leaving the frozen lake and its ghosts behind. By the 16th of February, as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the cabin appeared through the trees. Emma's breath caught in her throat, though whether from relief or disappointment she could not say. The structure was half finished, a monument to abandoned hope. One wall was solid stone, carefully mortared and strong. The other 3 walls were rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss. The roof was pine planks and sod patched in places but intact. A stone chimney rose from the center, cracked but functional. Inside, the space was sparse but clean. A single bed frame with rope supports and a straw mattress. A small iron stove, cold and dark. Shelves along one wall holding 5 books, 3 tin plates, 2 cups and various tools. A rough table and 1 chair. A single window covered with oiled leather instead of glass. It was not much. By any standard it was barely adequate. But it was more than Emma had dared to hope for. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching her face as she took it all in. "It is not finished," he said, and she heard something in his voice that might have been shame. "I started building it for Anne and Rose. After they died, I stopped seeing the point." Emma turned to face him. "It has walls, a roof, a stove. That is more than many have." "You can stay here tonight," Caleb said carefully, as if negotiating a treaty. "Tomorrow morning I will take you back to town if that is what you want. Or you can stay. Help me finish it. Make it into something real. Your choice. Always your choice." Emma stood in the center of the cabin, feeling the weight of yet another decision. Back to town meant facing Helen again, or worse, Chester Blake. It meant being sold again, probably to someone with fewer scruples than even Chester possessed. Staying meant trusting this strange, sad man who sang lullabies to the dead and gave her choices when the rest of the world had given her none. She looked at the half-built walls, at the potential rather than the present. She looked at Caleb, at his weathered face and patient eyes. "1 month," she said. "I will stay 1 month. Then I decide." Caleb nodded. "Fair enough." That night, Emma slept in the cabin's only bed while Caleb made his camp on the covered porch. She lay awake for hours listening to the night sounds of the wilderness, wolves howling in the distance, wind sighing through the pines, the crack and pop of settling timbers. Around 2 in the morning she woke to a sound that did not belong, distant but distinct. the rhythmic thud of hoofbeats muffled by snow but unmistakable to anyone who had grown up around horses. She rose and moved to the leather-covered window, peering through a gap in the covering. Moonlight turned the clearing silver and black. She saw nothing. No movement, no riders, nothing. But the sound had been real. She was certain. She lay back down, knife clutched in her hand, and did not sleep again until dawn. Morning came with gray light and the smell of coffee. Caleb was already up examining something outside. Emma dressed quickly and joined him. He crouched beside a set of tracks in the snow fresh enough that the edges had not yet softened. Horse tracks. Large horse, probably 16 hands or better. The tracks circled the cabin, approaching from the south, circling completely, then departing to the east. Someone had been watching them in the night. Caleb's jaw tightened as he studied the tracks. He followed them to the edge of the clearing, then returned, his expression grim. "They know we are here," he said simply. Emma felt ice that had nothing to do with temperature settle in her stomach. Chester, or someone he hired, does not matter which. What matters is they know where we are now, and they will be back. What do we do? Caleb looked at her, and she saw something new in his eyes. Not fear exactly, but wariness. The look of a man who has fought too many battles and knows another one is coming. "We prepare," he said, "and we hope that when they come, we are ready." But neither of them said what they were both thinking, that in the wilderness being ready was sometimes not enough, that Chester Blake was a man who never forgot a slight and never forgave a loss, that the peace they had found here in the mountains was as fragile as spring ice, and when it broke, they would both be fighting for their lives. The mountains held them in cold embrace as the sun climbed higher, indifferent to human struggles, ancient and patient, and utterly without mercy. The first week passed in a rhythm as old as survival itself. Wake with the sun, work until the light failed, sleep when exhaustion demanded it. Emma learned to swing an axe without blistering her hands beyond recognition, though the calluses formed slowly and painfully. She learned to mix mud and moss for chinking, to cut logs at precise angles so they locked together without gaps, to read the sky for weather that could kill them if they were caught unprepared. Caleb taught without lecturing. He showed her once, corrected her twice, then let her figure out the rest herself. When she made mistakes, he did not sigh or mock or lose patience. He simply adjusted her grip or her stance and let her try again. On the third day, Emma dropped a bucket of chinking mud. It splattered across the floor Caleb had spent 2 hours smoothing. She froze, waiting for the explosion of rage that Helen would have unleashed, for the blow that Walter would have delivered, while muttering apologies. Caleb looked at the mess, looked at her terrified face, and said, "Floor needed washing anyway." Then he handed her a rag and helped her clean it up. That night, alone at the cabin while he slept outside despite temperatures that dropped to 15 below, Emma cried into her blanket. Not from sadness, from the strange, painful relief of discovering that not everyone in the world was cruel. By the end of the first week, the cabin had a proper door that hung straight and closed tight. The window had real glass, expensive but necessary, purchased from a traveling merchant who asked no questions about why a mountain man suddenly needed to make his cabin livable. The roof no longer leaked when snow melted during the brief warmth of midday sun. The second week brought warmer weather, relatively speaking. The temperature climbed to a balmy 20 degrees above zero. Emma's muscles stopped screaming quite so loudly. Her hands became tough enough that splinters bothered her less than they had. Caleb began teaching her to read again. Each evening after work they sat by the fire and he guided her through the pages of Robinson Crusoe, his patience infinite as she stumbled over words that had once been familiar but had grown foreign through years of prohibition. He was cast away on an island. Emma read slowly, her finger tracing beneath each word like a child's. "Castaway is one word," Caleb corrected gently. "It means abandoned, left behind with no way home." "Like me," Emma said without thinking, then froze surprised she had spoken the thought aloud. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No, not like you. Crusoe had no choice about his island. You chose to be here. That makes all the difference." Emma thought about that as she continued reading, and something tight in her chest loosened fractionally. The third week brought the first real signs of spring. The snow began to retreat from the southern faces of slopes. Birds returned, filling the mornings with songs Emma had forgotten existed. And with the changing season came changes in the rhythm between her and Caleb. Small things. The way he smiled when she successfully completed a difficult task. The way she caught herself watching him work, admiring the economy of his movements, the quiet competence of his hands. The way they had begun finishing each other's sentences without noticing they were doing it. One evening, Emma attempted to make soup. She had watched Helen cook 1,000 times, but had rarely been allowed to try herself. The result was so oversalted it could have preserved meat for a decade. Caleb took a spoonful, his face carefully neutral. "It's good," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Emma laughed, actually laughed the sound bright and unexpected in the small cabin. "You are a terrible liar. It tastes like the ocean." "I would not know. Never seen the ocean." "Well, trust me. This is what I imagine the ocean tastes like. Salty and terrible and impossible to swallow." Caleb set down his spoon and allowed himself a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "I have been cooking for myself for 3 years. Before that, Anne did all the cooking because I was worse than useless. So believe me when I say this soup is far better than anything I have made." "That is not reassuring." "It was not meant to be. It was meant to be honest." They dumped the soup out for the scavengers and made do with dried meat and bread. And somehow the shared failure became its own kind of success, a moment of connection that mattered more than a perfect meal ever could. The 4th week ended with Emma making a decision. She woke on the morning of the 1st of March, exactly 2 weeks before her month would be up, and knew with absolute certainty that she would not be leaving. She did not tell Caleb immediately. Instead, she went outside and found a patch of earth that the sun had thawed enough to work. She spent the morning planting wildflower seeds she had gathered during their journey, pressing them into the soil with care, watering them with melted snow. When Caleb came around the corner of the cabin and saw what she was doing, he stopped. His face went very still. "Those will bloom in June," Emma said, not looking up from her work. "I thought the cabin could use some color." Caleb stood there for a long moment watching her tend to seeds that would not flower for months. Seeds that required a person to stay to water them, to care for them through their growth. Seeds that were a promise of permanence. "Emma," he said quietly, and she heard something in his voice that made her look up. His eyes were bright with moisture he was too proud to let fall. "Are you staying?" "Yes," she said simply. "If the offer still stands, I am staying." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and went back to work on the roof. But that evening he brought her a book she had not seen before, a collection of poems, the pages worn soft with reading. "This was Anne's," he said, holding it out. "She loved poetry, would read it aloud while she worked. I think she would have wanted you to have it." Emma took the book with reverent hands, understanding the weight of what he was offering. This was not just a book. This was trust. This was him making space for her in a heart that had locked itself away in grief. "Thank you," she whispered, and meant it for so much more than just the book. That night, for the first time since they had arrived, Caleb slept inside the cabin. Not in the bed, but near the fire, wrapped in his bedroll. And Emma slept more soundly than she had in years, knowing that the walls around her were walls she had helped build, and the man by the fire was someone who would never demand more than she was willing to give. But peace in the mountains was always temporary, and on the morning of March 1st it shattered completely. Emma was gathering firewood when she heard the horses. 3 of them moving fast through the forest, hoofbeats muffled by old snow but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to listen for. She dropped the wood and ran for the cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs. Caleb was already outside, his hand resting on the axe he had been using to split logs. His face had gone hard, every line of his body tense with readiness. "Inside," he said quietly. "Stay there unless I call for you." "No, I'm not hiding." He turned to look at her, and she saw fear in his eyes. Not for himself, for her. "Emma, please. These are not good people." "I know. That is why I am staying." Before he could argue further, the riders burst into the clearing. 3 horses, 3 riders, all familiar. Chester Blake on a black gelding, his face twisted with barely contained rage. Deputy Frank Morris on a bay mare, his hand resting on his gun. And Helen Warren on a gray mare that had seen better days, her expression equal parts triumph and cruelty. But no Walter. Emma noticed his absence immediately and felt a cold twist of foreboding in her gut. Chester dismounted, first his boots hitting the ground with theatrical precision. He held a piece of paper in his hand, waving it like a banner. "Caleb Stone," he called out, his voice carrying false cheer that fooled no one. "You are under arrest." Caleb did not move, did not respond, just watched Chester with the patient wariness of a wolf watching hunters. "Under arrest for what?" Emma called out, stepping forward despite Caleb's warning look. Chester's smile widened. "Kidnapping, theft, and as of last night, murder." The word hung in the cold air like an executioner's blade. Emma's blood turned to ice. "Murder? That is insane. He has been here the entire time." "Has he?" Chester tilted his head, mockery dripping from every syllable. "Can you prove that? Can anyone other than you, his accomplice, testify to his whereabouts every minute of every day? Who am I supposed to have murdered?" Caleb's voice was level, but Emma heard the tension beneath it. Chester's smile became something genuinely terrible. "Walter Finch. Found him last night. Throat cut clean across. Died in an alley behind the Red Lantern. And the knife that killed him." He paused for effect. "Same style you make stone. Same distinctive blade shape. Same length. Same everything." Emma's world tilted. Walter was dead. Her stepfather, weak and complicit, and ultimately harmless, was dead, and they were trying to pin it on Caleb. "That is impossible," Emma said, her voice stronger than she felt. "He was here. I was with him." "You are his victim and his accomplice," Deputy Morris said, speaking for the first time. His voice lacked Chester's theatrical quality, but held its own kind of threat. "Your testimony means nothing." Helen urged her horse forward, her face a mask of manufactured grief. "Daughter, come home with me. I forgive you for this madness. We can make things right." "I have no home with you," Emma said, each word deliberate and sharp. "You sold me. You took money for your own child. You lost the right to call me daughter that day." Helen's mask slipped, rage flashing across her features before she could control it. "Ungrateful little wretch! I should have drowned you when you were born." "Probably," Emma agreed calmly, "but you did not. So now you have to live with the fact that I survived despite you." Chester intervened before Helen could respond, clearly enjoying himself, but also impatient to move forward with his plan. "This is all very touching, but we have legal business to attend to. Stone, you are coming with us. We can do this easy or hard, your choice." Caleb's hand tightened on the axe handle. For a moment Emma thought he might fight. 3 against 1, and Morris had a gun, but Caleb was dangerous in ways that went beyond simple arithmetic. She had seen the scars on his hands, the economy of his movements. This was a man who had survived things that killed others. But fighting would only prove Chester's point, would only give them justification for shooting him down right here in front of his cabin. "Wait." Emma stepped forward, putting herself between Caleb and the riders. "If Walter is dead, I want to see the body. I want proof." "You calling me a liar, girl?" Chester's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Yes, I am calling you a liar and a manipulator and a man who would kill his own shadow if there was profit in it." The clearing went silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Chester's face darkened with genuine rage, the mask of civility finally cracking. Deputy Morris drew his gun, leveling it at Emma. "Watch your mouth or I'll watch it for you." Caleb moved with startling speed, the axe rising not as a weapon, but as a barrier, putting himself between Morris's gun and Emma. "You want me, fine. I will come. But you leave her alone. She has done nothing." "Nothing except aid and abet a murderer," Chester said, recovering his composure with visible effort. "But I am a generous man. I will let her go. For now." From the tree line a new voice interrupted them. "That is good to hear, Mr. Blake, because Miss Warren will not need to worry about testifying. I will do that myself." Pastor Green emerged from the forest on foot, his white hair wild, his breathing labored from exertion. But his eyes were bright with righteous anger, and he carried a telegram in his hand like a sword. Chester's face went white, then red, then white again. "What are you doing here, preacher?" "Stopping a murder before it happens." Pastor Green walked into the clearing unafraid, despite being unarmed and outnumbered. "I have here a telegram from Helena, Montana, sent by Walter Finch himself, yesterday, 6 hours after you claim he was murdered." The telegram fluttered in the mountain breeze. Emma's heart soared even as her mind struggled to process what this meant. Walter was alive. Walter had escaped. "Impossible," Chester sputtered. "I saw the body myself." Did you see a man roughly Walter's size wearing Walter's coat? A man you yourself killed to frame Mr. Stone?" Pastor Green's voice rang with the authority of someone accustomed to pronouncing judgment. "Walter Finch fled Virginia City on the night of February 14th, the same night Emma left. He took a horse and what little money he had hidden from his wife and rode for Helena. He is currently under the protection of the territorial marshal, and he has sworn a statement detailing your attempt to kill him, Mr. Blake. Detailing how you and Helen Warren conspired to eliminate him once Emma was sold because he knew too much, because he was the only witness to your other crimes." Helen's horse spooked as she jerked the reins hard, her face contorted with fury. "That coward, that traitor, I will find him and gut him myself." "An interesting confession," Pastor Green observed mildly. "Threatening to murder your husband in front of witnesses. Sheriff Burke is going to have a very interesting conversation with you, Helen." As if summoned by his name, Sheriff Thomas Burke emerged from the trees, riding slowly, his face set in the expression of a man who has been forced into doing something he would rather avoid. Behind him came 2 deputies, not including Morris, who now looked very much like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Chester," Sheriff Burke said tiredly, "Pastor Green showed me the telegram, and he had some very interesting things to say about Walter Finch's statement. Things about bribery, about threats, about you asking me to manufacture charges against Caleb Stone." Chester's hand moved toward the gun at his hip, but he was too slow, too angry, too desperate. Before his fingers closed around the grip, one of the deputies had his own weapon drawn and aimed. "Do not," the deputy said simply. Chester froze. For a long moment he stood there calculating odds, weighing options, searching for an escape that did not exist. Then his shoulders sagged in defeat. But his eyes, when they found Caleb, burned with a hatred that promised this was not over. Not by a long measure. "You think you have won?" Chester's voice was low and venomous. "You think this ends here? I know what you did in the War Stone. I know about Michael Blake, my brother, the man you murdered for $500. I was there. I hired you. And when I get out of this, when I am free again, I will make sure everyone knows what kind of monster Emma Warren invited into her bed." The words landed like artillery shells. Emma felt the impact physically, her breath catching, her vision narrowing. She turned to look at Caleb, saw the way he had gone absolutely still, the way all color had drained from his face. "Caleb." Her voice was small, uncertain, afraid of the answer. But Caleb could not look at her, could not meet her eyes. And in that moment of silence, Emma knew that whatever Chester was claiming, there was truth in it. Maybe not all of it, maybe twisted and weaponized, but truth nonetheless. Sheriff Burke ordered his deputies to arrest Helen. She fought screaming obscenities, promising revenge, threatening everyone present with elaborate and creative violence. It took both deputies to get her on a horse, hands tied, still spitting fury, even as they led her away. Chester was arrested as well, but he went quietly, that terrible smile never leaving his face, his eyes never leaving Caleb. Deputy Morris, seeing which way the wind was blowing, claimed he had been following orders and knew nothing about any conspiracy. Pastor Green fixed him with a look that could have frozen hell and suggested that perhaps Morris should spend some time in very deep prayer contemplating the nature of complicity and cowardice. When they had all gone, when the clearing was empty, except for Emma and Caleb and the echoing silence of accusations, Emma finally spoke. "Tell me it is not true." Her voice broke on the last word. "Tell me you did not kill an innocent man for money." Caleb stood there, still holding the axe, his knuckles white around the handle. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with something that might have been shame or grief or both. "I cannot tell you that, because it is true." Emma took a step back, then another. "When? 1864, during the war. I was a scout, sometimes more than a scout. Sometimes I did things that had nothing to do with scouting." He swallowed hard. "A man approached me, offered $500 to eliminate someone he claimed was a Confederate spy, gave me a name, Michael Blake, gave me a location. I was young, stupid, broke. I took the job. And I shot him. Clean kill, 1 bullet. He never knew it was coming." Caleb's hands were shaking now. "I collected my money, went back to my unit, and then 3 days later I learned the truth. Michael Blake was not a spy. He was a Union supporter, a good man, a merchant who gave supplies to our army. His brother Chester wanted him dead so he could inherit the family business, and I was the weapon he used." Emma felt like she was falling, even though her feet were still on solid ground. "You killed an innocent man." "Yes." "For money." "Yes." "And you have lived with that for 11 years. Every single day." Caleb finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it hurt to witness. "I tried to make amends. I found Chester 5 years later in 1870. I wrote him a letter confessing everything, begging for forgiveness, asking what I could do to make it right. He never responded, but apparently he kept the letter, kept it as insurance for exactly this moment." Emma stood there trying to process this, trying to reconcile the man who had given her freedom and kindness with the man who had once killed for hire, trying to understand how both could be true simultaneously. "Why did you not tell me?" she asked finally. "Because I was afraid you would look at me exactly the way you are looking at me now, like I am a monster." "Are you?" The question hung between them like a blade. Caleb did not answer immediately. He set down the axe, his movements careful and deliberate, and when he spoke his voice was barely above a whisper. "I do not know. I was once. Maybe I still am. Maybe monsters do not get to stop being monsters just because they feel bad about it." Emma wanted to run, wanted to demand that he take her back to town immediately, wanted to put as much distance between herself and this revelation as possible. But she did not run, because despite everything, despite the horror of what he had done, she saw something else when she looked at him. She saw the man who sang lullabies to ghosts, who built her a shelter in the cold, who gave her choices when everyone else had given her commands, who had spent 3 years punishing himself in isolation for sins that would not let him rest. She saw a man who had done terrible things and was trying desperately to become someone different. "Look at me," she said. Caleb raised his eyes, and she saw them swimming with tears he was too proud to let fall. "You killed that man. That is true. That is unforgivable and terrible, and I will not pretend otherwise." She took a breath. "But you also saved me. You gave me freedom. You have shown me more kindness in a month than I received in 21 years. Both of those things are true. Both of them matter. How can you stand to look at me?" "Because," Emma said slowly, working through the thought as she spoke it, "I think we are all more than the worst thing we have ever done. I think if we were not, there would be no point in trying to be better. And you are trying. I see that. I believe that. I do not deserve forgiveness. Probably not. But you are getting it anyway, because that is my choice to make, not yours." Caleb's legs seemed to give out. He sat down hard on the ground, his face in his hands, and he wept. Not quietly, not with dignity, but with the full body-shaking sobs of someone who had carried a weight too long and was finally allowed to set it down. Emma sat down beside him. She did not touch him, did not offer platitudes or false comfort. She just sat there bearing witness to his grief, letting him know through presence alone that he was not alone with his demons. When the tears finally stopped, when he had cried himself dry, Caleb looked at her with eyes red and swollen and asked, "Why are you still here?" "Because I choose to be," Emma said simply. "That was always the deal, my choice, and I choose you, all of you, even the parts that scare me." They sat there until the sun began its descent, two broken people trying to figure out how to be whole together. And when they finally rose and went back to the cabin, something fundamental had shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but something that might grow into love if they tended it with care. Trust, that was the word. Hard-won and precious and fragile as spring ice, but real nonetheless. The weeks that followed the confrontation were strange. Emma and Caleb moved around each other with a new awareness, a consciousness of how much had been revealed and how much still remained hidden. But they worked, they built. They turned the cabin into something that felt less like a shelter and more like a home. April arrived with warm winds and the smell of wet earth. The snow retreated rapidly, revealing ground that had been frozen since October. Emma's wildflower seeds sprouted tiny green shoots pushing through the soil with stubborn determination. Caleb added a real kitchen to the cabin with a proper counter and shelves for storage. Emma learned to cook slowly, improving from inedible to merely mediocre to occasionally good. They ate together each evening, their conversations growing easier, more natural. They told each other stories. Emma spoke of her father, the good man who had died too young and left her with a monster. Caleb spoke of Anne and Rose keeping their memories alive through words. One evening in mid-April, Emma looked up from the book she was reading and said, "I never thanked you properly for giving me a chance to be myself, to discover who that even is." Caleb looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "You do not need to thank me. You are doing all the work. But you made it possible. You gave me space to try." She set down the book. "Why? Really, I know what you said about making amends, but there is more to it than that. I can feel it." Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "When Anne and Rose died, I wanted to die too. I thought about it every day for 6 months, but I was too much of a coward to actually do it. So instead I came up here and slowly faded away. Became less and less until I was barely human anymore." He paused, the knife forgotten in his hands. "Then I saw you in that town square, saw the way you stood there refusing to break even while they tried to destroy you, and I thought if she can be that strong, maybe I can remember how to be alive." He looked at her directly. "You saved me as much as I saved you, maybe more." Emma felt something warm bloom in her chest, not desire exactly. Something deeper than that. Recognition. The sense of being seen by someone who understood. "Caleb," she said softly. "Yes." "Would you like to sit closer? You are always so far away." He hesitated, clearly uncertain, clearly afraid of overstepping. But then he moved to sit beside her on the bench, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Not quite contact, but the promise of it. They sat like that for an hour, reading their separate books, sharing space and silence, and something that felt dangerously close to contentment. By late April, the cabin was truly finished. 4 solid walls, a roof that would withstand anything short of a tornado, windows that let in light without letting in wind, a door that closed properly and could be barred from inside. Shelves for books that had grown to 8 volumes purchased from traveling merchants with money Caleb made selling furs. Emma had begun teaching. 3 children from the valley, the offspring of settlers and prospectors, came twice a week to learn their letters. Emma taught them with patience and creativity, using stories and games to make the lessons stick. Caleb built a long table and benches for them to sit at, and suddenly the cabin felt less like a refuge and more like a community. But peace, as always, was temporary. On the morning of April 20th, Caleb went into the forest to check his trap lines and came back with his face grim and a small object clutched in his fist. "What is it?" Emma asked, alarmed by his expression. He opened his hand. In his palm lay a single button brass, the kind used on expensive coats, and stamped into the brass was a symbol Emma had seen before, the stylized B that Chester Blake used on all his property. "Found it near my northern trap line, 3 miles from here." Caleb's jaw was tight. What Caleb did not tell Emma was what else he had found. Boot prints, size 11 military issue, and a campsite less than half a mile away where someone had been watching them for days. The tracker was good, professional, probably ex-military. Chester had hired the best. "Someone has been watching us, for weeks probably, mapping our movements." "Chester is still in jail." "Chester, yes, but Chester has money, and money buys loyalty, or at least obedience." "What do we do?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We move, temporarily. I have a friend, Jacob Mills, lives about 15 miles north of here, deeper in the mountains. His cabin is more defensible. We can stay there while I figure out who Chester sent and how to deal with them." "Run?" Emma's pride bristled at the word. "We are going to run? No, we are going to be smart. There is a difference." Caleb met her eyes. "Pride is for people who can afford it. We cannot, not yet." Emma wanted to argue, but recognized the truth in his words. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow. We take what we can carry, hide the rest, and disappear. With luck, whoever is watching will not realize we are gone until we are long past finding." That night they packed in silence, the easy companionship of recent weeks replaced by tension and worry. Emma found herself watching Caleb studying the precise way he selected what to take and what to leave. Every decision had weight. Every choice mattered. "Are you afraid?" she asked as they worked. "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "Fear is what keeps you alive in the wilderness. It is only a problem when it stops you from acting." "Have you been in situations like this before?" "More than I can count." His smile was grim. "The war. The years after. Being afraid is like being cold or hungry. You learn to function anyway." They left at first light on April 21st, following game trails that Caleb knew by heart. They moved quickly but carefully, Caleb checking constantly for signs of pursuit. The day was clear and warm, but Emma felt cold anyway, the chill of being hunted settling into her bones. By mid-afternoon, they had covered 7 miles. Caleb called a halt near a stream, and they refilled their water skins and ate dried meat without speaking. The forest around them was alive with spring sounds, birds calling, squirrels, chattering wind sighing through the new leaves. But underneath it all, Emma felt a presence, a watching. "He is still following us," Caleb said quietly, confirming her instinct. "About a mile back. His name is Jake Wilson, ex-cavalry scout, staying just out of sight. Skilled tracker, probably military trained. Chester is paying him well, but he is not trying very hard to hide. He wants us to know he is there." "How do you know?" "I can feel him, and I saw his smoke last night." "Why?" "To scare us, to make us make mistakes." Caleb helped her to her feet. "We need to keep moving. Jacob's cabin is still 8 miles ahead." They walked through the afternoon and into the evening. The sun set, painting the sky orange and pink and purple. And still they walked, Caleb navigating by stars and memory, Emma following with blind trust. Around midnight, when Emma was beginning to think she could not take another step, lights appeared through the trees. A cabin larger than Caleb's, with smoke rising from a stone chimney and a dog barking a warning. An old man emerged backlit by lamplight, a rifle in his hands. Then he recognized Caleb, and the rifle lowered. "Caleb Stone. Wondered when you would show up. Heard you got yourself into trouble with Chester Blake." "News travels fast, Jacob." "Always does. Come in, both of you. You look like death warmed over." Jacob Mills was 63 years old, thin as a willow, with white hair and bright blue eyes that missed nothing. He had been trapping and hunting these mountains for 40 years and knew every secret they held. His cabin was warm and welcoming, with a real stove and real furniture, and the kind of comfort that comes from decades of patient accumulation. He fed them stew and bread, asked no questions, and showed them to a small room with 2 beds. Separate beds. Emma noticed and appreciated his discretion. The next morning, over coffee strong enough to strip paint, Caleb explained their situation. Jacob listened without interrupting, his face grave. When Caleb finished, Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Chester Blake is a cancer. Been poisoning this territory for 20 years. Someone needs to cut him out. Question is how." "He is in jail," Emma pointed out. "For now. But men like Chester do not stay locked up. They have money, connections. He will be out in 6 months, maybe less, and then he will come for you both. Not because he wants the girl anymore, because you made him look weak, and men like Chester cannot afford that." "So what do we do?" Emma asked. Jacob leaned back in his chair, thinking. "You need to make it impossible for him to come after you, not just difficult, impossible. Which means you need evidence of crimes so serious that even his money cannot buy his way out, and you need witnesses so unimpeachable that no one will dare dismiss their testimony." "Do you have evidence like that?" Caleb's voice was skeptical. "No, but we can get it. Or rather, we can make Chester give it to us." "How?" Jacob smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a hunter who has just figured out where to place his trap. "We give him what he wants. We give him Emma. Or at least we make him think he is getting Emma. And when he comes for her, we make sure there are so many witnesses to what he does that even the devil himself could not get him acquitted." Emma felt ice slide down her spine. "You want to use me as bait?" "I want to give you the chance to end this on your terms," Jacob corrected gently. "Chester will never stop. Never. Unless we stop him permanently. And the only way to do that is to catch him in an act so heinous, so public, that he has no defense." Emma looked at Caleb, saw the war in his eyes, the part of him that wanted to protect her at all costs, fighting with the part that knew Jacob was right. "It is too dangerous," Caleb said finally. "Living is dangerous," Emma replied. "And I am tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting men like Chester dictate my life." She turned to Jacob. "What would I need to do?" Jacob explained the plan. It was simple, which made it dangerous. Emma would return to Virginia City alone, ostensibly to collect belongings she had left behind. Chester, through his network of informants, would learn of her presence. He would make a move, probably trying to kidnap her or force her back to the Red Lantern. And when he did, Jacob and Caleb would be watching along with Pastor Green and several other respected citizens who would serve as witnesses. "If it works," Jacob said, "we get him for kidnapping, assault, maybe attempted murder, crime serious enough that even his money cannot buy freedom. And you get your life back, both of you." "And if it does not work?" Emma asked. "Then I die," Emma said simply. "But at least I die fighting. That is better than spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but Emma's face was set with determination he recognized. She had made her choice, and he had promised to respect her choices, even when they terrified him. They spent 3 days preparing. Jacob sent word to Pastor Green, who agreed to gather witnesses and be present in town. Caleb taught Emma how to use a knife for self-defense, where to strike to disable rather than kill. Emma practiced until her hands were sore and her movements became automatic. On the morning of April 30th, Emma rode into Virginia City alone. She wore her old dress, the one she had arrived in, now cleaned and repaired. She kept her head high and her spine straight, even though her heart hammered against her ribs hard enough to bruise. Caleb and Jacob watched from the tree line, invisible in the shadows, as she approached the town square. Pastor Green stood near the general store, pretending to examine supplies. 3 other men settlers that Jacob trusted loitered nearby, apparently engaged in idle conversation, but watching everything. Emma walked slowly through the town, letting herself be seen. She stopped at the dress shop at the general store at the well where women gathered to gossip. She made no secret of her presence. It took less than an hour for word to reach Chester. He was standing on the balcony of the Red Lantern when Emma walked past, and their eyes met across the dusty street. His face split into a smile that promised nothing good. "Well, well," Chester called down. "The little bird returns to her cage." Emma did not respond, just kept walking, her pace steady, her face calm. Chester descended from the balcony with surprising speed for a man his age. Within minutes he was following her deputy Morris at his side. The deputy looked uncomfortable, clearly remembering how the last confrontation had ended, but loyalty or fear kept him in place. "Miss Warren," Chester called, his voice carrying false warmth. "Surely you are not ignoring me. That would be rude. Your mother raised you better than that." Emma stopped walking, turned to face him. "My mother is in jail, and she deserves to be there. Temporary setback. She will be out soon. We all will." Chester stepped closer, invading her space with deliberate intent. "Come back to the Red Lantern. We can discuss this like civilized people. I bear you no ill will. What happened was just business. Nothing personal." "Everything about it was personal. You tried to buy me. Then you tried to frame Caleb for murder. Then you tried to kill Walter. All very personal, Mr. Blake." Chester's smile never wavered, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Careful, girl. You are making accusations that could get you hurt." "That sounds like a threat." "Observation. Virginia City can be dangerous for young women without protection." Emma felt her pulse racing, but kept her voice steady. "I do not need protection, and I do not need anything from you. I came for my belongings, and then I am leaving." "I think not." Chester nodded to Deputy Morris. "Arrest her. Trespassing. Disturbing the peace. Whatever charge you want. Just get her secured." Morris pulled handcuffs from his belt, looking miserable but compliant. He reached for Emma's wrist. That was when Pastor Green stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority. "Under what legal statute are you arresting this woman deputy trespassing in a public town square? I think not. Disturbing the peace. She has done nothing but walk quietly and speak when spoken to." Behind him, the three settlers moved closer, forming a loose circle. Witnesses. Protectors. Chester's face darkened. "This is none of your concern, preacher. A young woman being unlawfully arrested is absolutely my concern. It is the concern of anyone with a conscience." Pastor Green held up a small notebook. "And I am documenting everything, every word, every action, for the territorial judge when he arrives next month." Chester looked around, calculating odds, seeing the trap too late. He had been so focused on Emma that he had not noticed the witnesses gathering, had not realized he was being watched by people who mattered, people with credibility. "This is not over," he snarled, but he backed away, signaling Morris to stand down. Emma felt her knees go weak with relief, but did not let it show. She thanked Pastor Green quietly and began walking toward the edge of town, toward the forest where Caleb and Jacob waited. She had almost reached the tree line when Chester made his mistake. Enraged by his failure by being outsmarted by a girl and an old preacher, Chester grabbed a pistol from Morris's holster and aimed at Emma's back. "If I cannot have you," he shouted, "no one will." The shot echoed across the town square like thunder. Emma felt something hot and sharp tear through her left shoulder, spinning her around. She fell to her knees, blood spreading across her dress like a dark flower blooming. Chaos erupted. Pastor Green was shouting. The settlers were running forward. And from the forest, Caleb burst forth with a roar that sounded barely human. He covered the distance in seconds faster than should have been possible and slammed into Chester with the full force of his body. They went down together, rolling in the dirt, Caleb's hands finding Chester's throat. "You shot her!" Caleb snarled, his voice thick with rage and anguish. "You shot Emma!" Chester struggled, but Caleb was stronger, younger and motivated by something primal. His thumbs pressed into Chester's windpipe, cutting off air-crushing cartilage. Chester's face turned purple. His hands clawed at Caleb's wrists, but found no purchase. His eyes bulged with fear and realization. Caleb? Emma's voice weak but clear cut through the red haze of his fury. Caleb, stop. He did not stop. Could not stop. All the rage, all the guilt, all the helplessness of the past weeks poured out through his hands. This man had tried to destroy Emma, had hurt her, was responsible for the blood Emma could see spreading across her dress. Caleb, look at me. Emma's voice was stronger now, desperate. Look at me. Something in her tone penetrated. Caleb turned his head, and their eyes met across the dusty ground. If you kill him, Emma said, her voice shaking but determined, you become him. You become the thing you hate. Please, I am begging you. Let him face justice. Let him be judged by law, not by vengeance. Caleb's hands trembled. Every instinct screamed at him to finish it, to end the threat permanently, to make sure Chester Blake could never hurt anyone again. But Emma's eyes held his, and in them he saw not fear or judgment, but faith. Faith that he could be better than his worst impulses. Faith that he could choose mercy over murder. His hands loosened. Chester gasped, sucking in air, coughing and choking. Caleb stood, his whole body shaking with adrenaline and restraint, and stepped away. Sheriff Burke, who had been frozen in shock, finally moved. He and another deputy grabbed Chester this time, putting real handcuffs on him, this time treating him like the criminal he was. Witnessed by myself and 15 citizens, Pastor Green announced, his voice carrying across the square. Chester Blake attempted murder, in broad daylight, with malice aforethought. There is no question, no ambiguity. He will hang for this. Caleb did not hear him. He was already moving toward Emma, dropping to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her shoulder, afraid to touch and cause more pain. How bad? He asked, his voice raw. Hurts, Emma admitted, but I think it went through, missed the bone. A doctor was summoned. Emma was carried to his office, Caleb refusing to leave her side. The bullet had indeed passed through, cleanly missing major blood vessels and bone. Painful, but not fatal. With proper care she would heal completely. As the doctor stitched the wound, Caleb held Emma's hand, his grip gentle but firm. And Emma, despite the pain, despite everything, felt something that might have been joy. They had survived, both of them. And Chester Blake, for all his power and money and cruelty, had finally been caught in a trap of his own making. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. The doctor's office smelled of carbolic acid and old blood. Emma lay on the examination table, her face pale but set with determination that the pain could not erase. The bullet wound in her shoulder had been cleaned, stitched with 13 careful sutures, and bandaged with strips of boiled linen. The doctor, a man named Hiram Walsh, who had seen more gunshot wounds than he cared to remember, worked with efficient precision. Caleb stood beside the table, one hand holding Emma's, the other clenched into a fist so tight his knuckles had gone white. He had not spoken since they entered the office, had not moved except to breathe. His eyes never left Emma's face, watching for any sign that the pain was more than she could bear. When Dr. Walsh finished and stepped back, wiping his hands on a towel that would never be fully clean again, he looked at Caleb with the professional sympathy of someone who has delivered bad news too many times. She will live. The wound is clean. No major vessels damaged. No bone involvement. If infection does not set in, she should recover fully within 6 weeks, maybe 8. Caleb nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Dr. Walsh continued, his voice gentler now. But she needs rest, real rest. No heavy work, no stress. And someone needs to watch her for fever, change the dressings twice daily, keep the wound clean. He paused. Can you do that? Yes. The word came out rough, scraped raw by emotion Caleb could not quite contain. Good, because she is stubborn as they come, and stubborn people make poor patients. They try to do too much too soon. Dr. Walsh looked at Emma directly. Young lady, if you tear these stitches, they will not heal properly. You will have a scar regardless, but if you are careful, it will be small. If you are foolish, it will be ugly and possibly crippling. Do you understand? Emma met his eyes and nodded. I understand. Then go. Get out of my office before someone else gets themselves shot. I am too old for this much excitement in one day." Caleb helped Emma to her feet, his movements gentle despite the strength in his hands. She swayed slightly lightheaded from blood loss and shock, and he caught her immediately. "I can walk," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know you can, but you do not have to." Before she could argue, he lifted her carefully, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back well away from the injured shoulder. She was lighter than he expected, or perhaps adrenaline made him stronger. He carried her out of Dr. Walsh's office and into the street where the afternoon sun painted everything gold and the gathered crowd parted to let them through. Pastor Green approached, his face grave but satisfied. "Chester Blake has been formally charged with attempted murder. The judge arrives in 2 weeks. Given the number of witnesses and the severity of the crime, there is no question of the outcome. He will hang." Emma stirred in Caleb's arms. "No, not hang. Prison, life in prison, but not death." Pastor Green looked surprised. "My dear, he tried to kill you." "I know, and he should pay for that. But I will not have his death on my conscience. I will not become like him even to punish him." Her voice was firm despite her weakness. "Life in prison, that is justice. Hanging is revenge." The old preacher studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You have more grace than most, Emma Warren. I will speak to the judge. Life imprisonment is still justice if you are willing to testify to that being your wish." "I am." Caleb carried Emma to Jacob Mills's cabin 3 miles outside of town, where they had left their belongings. Jacob had prepared a bed, and Caleb laid Emma down with the care of someone handling something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. For the next 3 days, Emma drifted in and out of feverish sleep while Caleb kept vigil. He changed her dressings as Dr. Walsh had instructed. He spooned water between her lips when she was too weak to drink on her own. He sat beside her bed through 3 long nights watching the rise and fall of her breathing, terrified that each breath might be the last. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Emma woke clear-headed and desperately hungry. Caleb, who had not slept more than an hour at a time since the shooting, actually wept when she asked for food. "I thought I lost you," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "When I saw you fall, when I saw the blood, I thought I had failed. Again. That everyone I tried to protect died anyway." Emma reached out with her good arm and took his hand. "But I did not die. I am here. We are both here. Because of luck. Because Chester is a poor shot. Because the bullet missed everything vital by inches. No. Because you taught me to be strong. Because you gave me a reason to fight. Because I knew if I died, you would blame yourself, and I could not do that to you." Caleb pressed her hand to his forehead and stayed there, breathing hard, trying to compose himself. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red but dry. "Emma, I need to tell you something. Before this goes any further. Before you make any more choices about your life that involve me." She waited, her heart rate picking up despite her weakness. "I love you." The words came out stark and simple, stripped of poetry or eloquence. "I did not mean to, did not plan to, but I do. I love you in a way I have not loved anyone since Anne died. Maybe in a way I never loved Anne because this is different, deeper, more conscious, and it terrifies me." Emma felt her breath catch. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because everyone I love dies. My parents, my wife, my daughter. And now you were shot, and I thought the pattern was continuing. Thought I was cursed to destroy everyone I care about. That is not how curses work. That is not how anything works." Emma squeezed his hand as hard as her weakened state allowed. "People die, Caleb. That is what people do. But some people live first. Really live. And I am living. For the first time in my life, I am actually living because of you. You do not need me to live. No, but I want you. There is a difference. Need is desperate and small. Want is a choice. And I choose you." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers for doubt or hesitation. Finding none, he leaned forward and kissed her forehead gentle as a prayer. "When you are healed," he said quietly, "when you are strong again, I am going to ask you to marry me, and I hope with everything I have that you say yes." Emma smiled her first real smile since the shooting. "Then I suppose I had better heal quickly, because the answer is already yes, and I hate waiting." The trial of Chester Blake took place on the 15th of June in the largest building in Virginia City, the community hall that served as courtroom, church, and meeting place depending on the day of the week. Territorial Judge Harrison Caldwell presided, a man of 60 with silver hair and a reputation for fairness that had survived 30 years on the bench. Chester sat in chains, his face a mask of carefully controlled rage. Helen Warren sat in the gallery released on bail, her face harder than stone. Deputy Morris had turned state's witness, his testimony damning in its specificity. Emma took the stand, her shoulders still bandaged beneath her dress, and told her story. From the sale in the town square to the shooting, she recounted everything in clear, precise detail. She did not embellish, did not exaggerate, simply told the truth and let it speak for itself. When the prosecutor asked if she wanted to see Chester Blake hanged for his crimes, Emma said quietly, "No. I want to see him imprisoned for life. I want him to spend every day for the rest of his years thinking about what he has done and what he has lost. Death is too quick, too easy. Justice means he lives with his choices." The jury deliberated for 47 minutes. They returned with a verdict of guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, assault. The list went on. Judge Caldwell sentenced Chester Blake to life imprisonment at the Territorial Prison in Deer Lodge with no possibility of parole. As the bailiff led Chester away in chains, he turned to look at Emma one final time. "You think you have won," he said, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "But you will never be free of me, never. Every time you look at that scar, you will remember." Emma stood and faced him directly. "No. Every time I look at that scar, I will remember that I survived, that I chose mercy when you offered only cruelty, that I am stronger than you ever imagined. And that is not your legacy, Mr. Blake. It is mine." Chester was dragged out, still protesting, still threatening, still refusing to accept his defeat. The courtroom erupted in applause, and Emma sat down heavily exhausted, but victorious. Helen Warren was tried separately 2 days later. Her sentence was 10 years for conspiracy and being an accessory to attempted murder. She went to prison without a word, her face empty of everything except bitterness. And Emma, for the first time in her 21 years, was truly free. Free of her mother, free of Chester Blake, free of everyone who had tried to own or destroy her. July brought heat that the mountains barely mitigated. Emma's wound healed cleanly, the stitches removed after 3 weeks, leaving a scar that pulled slightly when she raised her arm but caused no lasting damage. She regained her strength slowly, first walking short distances around Jacob's cabin, then longer hikes through the forest, then finally resuming the work of daily living. On the evening of July 20th, as the sun set fire to the western sky, Caleb took Emma to the frozen lake where he had first met Anne. The ice had long since melted, and the water reflected the colors of sunset like liquid-stained glass. They stood on the shore, and Caleb took both of Emma's hands in his. "I have nothing to offer you that most women would want." He began, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. "No wealth, no position in society, no promise of comfort or ease. All I have is a cabin in the mountains, these 2 hands, and a heart that is more broken than whole. But what I have is yours if you will take it." He knelt, his knee pressing into the soft earth at the water's edge. "Emma Warren, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a man who has made more mistakes than he can count, but who loves you more than he thought it possible to love anyone? Will you build a life with me, whatever that life turns out to be?" Emma looked down at him, at this man who had given her freedom and asked for nothing in return, who had shown her that kindness was real and love was possible, and she felt her heart expand until she thought it might burst. "Yes," she said, the word coming out choked with emotion. Yes, I will marry you. Not because you saved me, but because you let me save myself. Not because I need you, but because I choose you. Every day I choose you." Caleb stood and pulled her into his arms, careful of her healing shoulder, and held her as the sun completed its descent and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. They married on the 9th of September beneath the tallest pine on the ridge above their cabin. Pastor Green officiated, his voice carrying across the gathering of 43 people who had come from miles around to witness the union. Miners, trappers, settlers, and townsfolk who had heard the story and wanted to be part of its happier chapter. Emma wore a simple blue dress sewn by the women of Virginia City as a wedding gift. Wildflowers from her garden were braided through her hair, which hung loose for the first time since childhood. Caleb wore a new shirt, white cotton, and had trimmed his beard to reveal a face more handsome than Emma had fully realized. The vows they spoke were not traditional. They had written them together sitting at their table by lamplight, choosing words that meant something real. Caleb went first. "I promise to honor your freedom and your choices, to stand beside you, not in front of you, to listen when you speak and learn when I am wrong, to give you space when you need it and presence when you want it, to love you not as property or possession, but as a partner in everything we build together." Emma's turn. "I promise to choose you every day in big ways and small, to trust you with my fears and my hopes, to build beside you rather than behind you, to see you clearly, all of you, the good and the difficult and the complicated, and love what I see, to make a home that is ours, not mine or yours, but something entirely new." Pastor Green pronounced them husband and wife, and Caleb kissed Emma with a tenderness that made several of the watching women wipe tears from their eyes. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Jacob Mills played a fiddle he had not touched in 15 years. People danced in the clearing, their laughter echoing off the mountains. Food appeared from a dozen sources, more than they could possibly eat, and the party continued until the moon rose high and full. That night, Emma and Caleb returned to their cabin, to the bed they would now share, and discovered each other with the careful reverence of two people who had waited for something worth having. And in the darkness wrapped in each other, they spoke promises that had nothing to do with vows and everything to do with the wordless language of bodies that trust each other completely. September turned to October, and October to November. The first snows came early, dusting the peaks with white that would not fully melt until May. Emma and Caleb settled into the rhythm of married life with surprising ease. They worked together during the day, expanding the cabin to add a proper bedroom and a larger space for Emma's growing school. At night they read together, planned together, or simply sat in comfortable silence, needing nothing but each other's presence. By December, Emma noticed changes in her body. Her breasts were tender. Her appetite had become enormous. She was exhausted by mid-afternoon despite doing less work than usual, and her monthly bleeding, regular as clockwork for 9 years, had simply stopped. She knew what this meant, but did not say anything to Caleb for 2 weeks, wanting to be absolutely certain before raising hopes that might be dashed. But on the morning of December 15th, when she barely made it outside before vomiting violently, Caleb knew. "How long?" he asked gently, holding her hair back, offering water to rinse her mouth. 2 months, maybe 3. I am not entirely sure." "Are you frightened?" Emma considered the question honestly. "Yes, and excited, and terrified, all of it at once. We should bring the midwife, Mrs. Abigail Winters. She is the best in the territory, delivered over 300 babies, and lost fewer than most." Emma agreed, and 3 days later Mrs. Abigail made the long trek up the mountain. She was 58 years old, round as an apple, with hands that were surprisingly gentle and eyes that missed nothing. She examined Emma thoroughly, her face growing more serious as the examination continued. Finally, she sat back and looked at both of them with an expression that was equal parts wonder and worry. "Well," she said slowly, "this is unexpected." "What is unexpected?" Caleb's voice was tight with concern. You are not having one baby, my dear. You are having 3. The words hung in the air like a pronouncement of sentence. Emma and Caleb stared at Mrs. Abigail, then at each other, then back at the midwife, certain they had misheard. 3. Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. 3. Triplets. I can feel 3 separate heartbeats when I listen carefully. I have delivered exactly 2 sets of triplets in my entire career, and both times it was difficult and dangerous. I will not lie to you. This is serious. The risks are significant for both you and the babies. Caleb had gone pale. What can we do? Should she go to Helena? To a hospital? She could, but honestly, a hospital in Helena is not much better equipped than I am. What matters is careful monitoring, good nutrition, and luck. A lot of luck. Mrs. Abigail took Emma's hand. I will be honest with you, child. Women die in childbirth every day from carrying just 1 baby. Carrying 3 multiplies every risk. You could hemorrhage. The babies could come too early. 1 or more might not survive. And there is a real possibility that you might not survive. Emma felt the room tilt, but forced herself to focus. What are the actual numbers? I want to know the truth. Mrs. Abigail sighed. With triplets, maybe 1 in 3 mothers does not survive. Maybe 1 in 2 of the babies. These are rough estimates, you understand. Every situation is different. So there is a chance we all make it. Yes, a chance. Not a certainty, but a chance. Emma looked at Caleb, saw the fear written across every line of his face, and made her decision. Then we try. We do everything right, we prepare as best we can, and we try. Because these are our children, and I will not give up on them before they even have a chance to live. Mrs. Abigail nodded, respect clear in her eyes. Then we have work to do. You need to eat more than you think possible, rest more than seems necessary, and we need to prepare for every possible complication, because with triplets, something always goes wrong. The next months passed in a blur of preparation and fear and hope, tangled together until they were impossible to separate. Caleb built 3 cradles, each one carved with exquisite care. A bear for strength, an elk for grace, a bird for freedom. He worked on them every evening, his hands moving with meditative precision, and Emma watched and saw him building not just furniture, but hope. Emma's body changed dramatically. By her 6th month, she was enormous, her belly so large she could no longer see her feet. Walking became difficult, sleeping nearly impossible. Every position hurt, every movement was an effort. But the babies moved. She felt them constantly now, 3 separate beings pushing and kicking and claiming their space. Sometimes she could see the outline of a foot pressing against her skin, or an elbow, or what might have been a hand. She would place her palm over these movements and feel connected to these lives she was carrying in a way that words could not capture. Caleb sang to them. Every night he would kneel beside Emma's belly and sing the same lullaby he had once sung to Rose. And Emma would cry quietly, moved by the tenderness of this man who had lost so much and was brave enough to risk loving again. The babies were due in mid-August. Emma began labor on August 12th, 3 weeks early, during a thunderstorm that shook the cabin's walls and turned the world outside into chaos. Mrs. Abigail arrived within an hour, having camped nearby for the last 2 weeks in preparation for exactly this moment. She brought 2 other women with her, experienced mothers who had assisted with difficult births before. They moved through the cabin with calm efficiency, boiling water, laying out clean linens, preparing for every contingency. The labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of pain that Emma had not imagined was possible, pain that made everything else she had endured seem insignificant by comparison. She screamed, she cursed, she begged for it to stop. And through it all, Caleb stayed beside her, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool water, whispering encouragement that she could not hear through the agony, but that mattered anyway. The first baby came at 2 in the morning. A boy, small and red and screaming with impressive volume. Mrs. Abigail caught him, checked him over quickly, and handed him to one of her assistants to clean and wrap. 1 down, she said, her face grim with concentration. 2 to go. The second baby came 23 minutes later. Another boy slightly larger than his brother, his cries just as loud. Emma barely registered his arrival before the next contraction hit harder than any before. "The last one is breech," Mrs. Abigail announced, her voice tight with worry. "I need to turn it. Emma, this is going to hurt worse than anything so far. But I need you to stay with me. Do not push until I tell you. Can you do that?" Emma, beyond words, beyond thought, nodded. She felt Mrs. Abigail's hands inside her, felt pressure and pain and a violation that made her want to die just to make it stop. She heard Caleb's voice, distant and distorted, saying her name over and over like a prayer. Then something shifted. Mrs. Abigail pulled her hands out covered in blood and said, "Now, push now." Emma pushed with everything she had left, which was not much. Pushed until she saw stars behind her closed eyelids. Pushed until she heard a ripping sound and felt warm blood flood out of her body in amounts that could not possibly be good. And then the third baby was born, a girl small and blue and completely silent. "She is not breathing," one of the assistants said, panic creeping into her voice. Mrs. Abigail took the baby, turned her upside down, and struck her back sharply. Nothing. She did it again harder. Still nothing. Caleb stood, his face ashen, and walked over. He took his daughter from Mrs. Abigail's hands, cradled her tiny form, and began to blow gentle puffs of air into her mouth. Once, twice, 3 times. The baby's chest rose, fell, rose again, and then she cried. A thin, reedy sound, but unmistakably alive. Caleb's knees buckled. He sank to the floor, still holding his daughter, tears streaming down his face. "Breathe, little one. Just breathe. Please breathe." Emma, hearing that name, understanding what it meant, found strength she did not know she still possessed. "Give her to me." Caleb stood and brought the baby to Emma, placing her on Emma's chest. Emma wrapped her arms around her daughter, felt the fragile pulse of that tiny heart, and wept with relief and joy and exhaustion so profound she could barely remain conscious. Mrs. Abigail worked to stop the bleeding, her hands moving quickly, her face concerned but not panicked. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, she sat back. "You are going to live. The bleeding is slowing. But you lost a lot of blood. You will be weak for weeks, maybe months. No heavy work, plenty of rest, plenty of food. Do you hear me?" "I hear you," Emma whispered, not taking her eyes off her daughter. The boys were brought over, cleaned and swaddled, and placed on either side of Emma. 2 sons and a daughter. 3 lives, each one improbable, each one a miracle. They named them that night while the storm raged outside and the fire burned low in the hearth. The first boy, the one who had been so eager to arrive, Benjamin, for strength and determination. The second boy, the one who had waited his turn, Daniel, for patience and wisdom. The girl, the one who had fought to breathe, Rose. For the daughter Caleb had lost, and the hope that life could be given a second chance. 3 babies, 3 cradles, 3 futures unwritten. Emma looked at Caleb, at his face wet with tears and exhausted with relief, and said, "We did it. We actually did it. You did it. You are stronger than the mountains, Emma Stone, stronger than anything in this world. No, we did it. Together. Everything is together now." The first year was brutal. 3 infants who needed constant care, constant feeding, constant attention. Emma and Caleb survived on broken sleep and determination. They took turns through the night, one sleeping while the other tended the babies, then switching before either collapsed from exhaustion. The women from the valley came to help, bringing food offering to watch the children for a few hours, teaching Emma the skills that mothers usually learned from their own mothers. Emma had no mother to teach her, but she had a community, and that turned out to be enough. Benjamin grew strong and quiet, watching everything with serious eyes. Daniel was curious and restless, always moving, always exploring. Rose was stubborn and willful, refusing to be left out of anything her brothers did. By the time they were 2 years old, all 3 were walking. By 3, they were talking in complete sentences and forming a bond between them that was almost supernatural in its closeness. They seemed to communicate without words, sometimes knowing what the others needed or wanted before anyone spoke. Emma's school had continued, though smaller, during the first year after the births. But as the children grew and became more independent, more students returned. The cabin had been expanded again, a whole room dedicated to learning with a long table and benches and shelves full of books purchased with money from Caleb's furs and donations from grateful parents. Emma taught reading and writing and arithmetic. She taught history and geography and the natural sciences. But most of all, she taught her students that learning was power, that knowledge was freedom, that education was the one thing no one could ever take away from them. By the time Benjamin, Daniel, and Rose were 5 years old, they sat in on lessons with the other children, absorbing everything like sponges. By 7, they were reading at a level far beyond their years. By 10, they were helping Emma teach the younger students. The years passed the way they do in the mountains, slowly, steadily, one season folding into the next without fanfare. Caleb's hair turned more gray than brown. Lines appeared around Emma's eyes, not from sorrow, but from laughter and squinting into sunlight. The cabin expanded to include separate rooms for the children, a proper workshop for Caleb, a larger kitchen for Emma. Benjamin, at 15, declared he wanted to be a carpenter like his father. Caleb taught him every skill he knew, watching with pride as his son's hands learned the language of wood and tools. Daniel wanted to be a guide, someone who could lead travelers safely through the mountains. He spent his days learning every trail, every peak, every secret that the wilderness held. Caleb taught him to read the weather, to track animals, to survive when survival seemed impossible. Rose wanted to teach. She followed her mother everywhere, absorbing not just what Emma taught, but how she taught. The patience, the creativity, the unwavering belief that every student could learn if given the right approach. By 1891, 15 years after the triplets were born, all 3 were helping to support the family. Benjamin built furniture that was prized throughout the territory. Daniel guided hunting parties and surveyors through passes that most considered impassable. Rose had opened a second school in a neighboring valley, teaching children whose parents had never learned to read themselves. The legacy was spreading. The knowledge was multiplying. The impact of 2 people who had chosen each other against all odds was rippling outward in ways they could never have imagined. But life, as always, demanded prices for its gifts. And on a morning in June 1918, Emma did not wake up. She was 64 years old. She had lived 43 years longer than the girl who stood in the Virginia City Square waiting to be sold. 43 years of freedom and love and purpose. Caleb found her in their bed, her face peaceful, her hand resting over her heart. She looked like she was sleeping, but she was gone, slipped away in the night without pain or warning, simply deciding that her work was done and it was time to rest. The funeral was attended by over 200 people, former students, now adults with children of their own, settlers who had been helped by the Stone family, merchants and miners and trappers and families who had never met Emma but had heard the stories and wanted to pay respect. Pastor Green, now 101 years old and held upright more by faith than physical strength, delivered the eulogy. Emma Stone was sold for $21, but she became worth more than all the gold in Montana. She became a mother, a teacher, a light in the wilderness. And though she is gone, her legacy remains in every child she taught, in every life she touched, in every person who learned from her that kindness is stronger than cruelty and love is stronger than hate. They buried Emma on the ridge beneath the pine where she and Caleb had married, where the wildflowers she had planted still bloomed every summer in colors she had chosen decades ago. Caleb stood beside the grave for a long time after everyone else had left. His children waited at a respectful distance, knowing their father needed these moments alone with the woman who had transformed his life. "I promised to choose you every day," Caleb said quietly to the fresh earth. "And I kept that promise. 43 years, not enough, never enough, but I am grateful for every single one." He stayed until sunset painted the sky the colors of fire, then walked slowly back to the cabin that would never feel quite like home again. 2 years later, on a cold December morning in 1920, Caleb died in his sleep. 78 years old, worn down by time and grief, he simply stopped fighting and let himself go to wherever Emma had gone. They buried him beside her, the two graves side by side under the ancient pine. The headstone read, "Emma and Caleb Stone. They chose each other. They chose freedom. They chose love." The cabin stood empty for a time, maintained by the triplets, but not lived in. It had served its purpose, had sheltered a love that defied probability, had witnessed the birth of 3 lives and the slow building of a legacy that would outlive everyone who knew the original story. Eventually, it became a school, then a small museum, then a historical site that tourists visited when they came to Montana, seeking connection to the past. The cradles were still there, carefully preserved. The bed where Emma and Caleb had slept. The table where they had eaten countless meals and made endless plans. The books they had read together by firelight. And people came, year after year, decade after decade. They came to see the place where a woman who was sold for $21 became a legend, where a man who had killed in his youth learned to build in his maturity, where 3 babies who should not have survived grew up to change hundreds of lives. Montana, June 1918. The porch of the old cabin now preserved as it was when Emma and Caleb lived there. Caleb Stone, 76 years old, stopped speaking. The story had taken him 3 hours to tell, and Lily had not moved once, barely dared to breathe, afraid that any interruption would break the spell. "And that," Caleb said quietly, his voice hoarse from so much talking, "is how your grandmother and I came to be. That is the story of the choice that changed everything." Lily wiped tears from her face with the back of her hand. "That is the most beautiful and terrible and wonderful story I have ever heard." "It was beautiful and terrible and wonderful to live, so I suppose that makes sense." Caleb smiled, sad but genuine. "Do you understand now why I tell you to choose carefully? Why I say that the choices you make matter more than the circumstances you are born into?" "Yes, but grandfather, I still do not know what to choose. Thomas wants to marry me, but his family wants me to give up teaching, to stay home and have children and forget everything else, and I do not know if I can do that." Caleb looked at his granddaughter, saw so much of Emma in her face that it hurt his heart and healed it at the same time. "Then you already know your answer. Your grandmother taught hundreds of children to read. She changed lives. She left a mark on this world that will last long after her grave is forgotten. Would she have wanted you to give that up? No. But what if I end up alone? What if I choose teaching and no one ever wants me because of it? Then you will be alone. And that is hard, I will not pretend otherwise, but it is better to be alone and free than partnered and caged. Your grandmother knew that. She chose freedom even when it looked like the lonelier path. And then she found love anyway, not because she sought it, but because she was finally free enough to recognize it when it arrived." Lily sat with that for a long moment. Then she stood, kissed her grandfather's forehead, and said, "Thank you, for the story, for the truth, for showing me that hard choices are still worth making." "Where are you going?" "To tell Thomas that I choose myself, that if he wants me, he has to want all of me, including the teacher part. And if he cannot accept that, then he is not the right person." Caleb watched her walk away, her spine straight, her head high, and he smiled. Emma would have been proud. He lived 2 more years after that conversation, peacefully tending the cabin and greeting visitors who came to hear the story. He died in December 1920, peacefully in his sleep, having finally told the story one last time to someone who needed to hear it. His children buried him beside Emma, and the story became part of the land itself, whispered by the wind through the pines. The years passed. Decades turned to centuries. The cabin stood preserved first by the family, then by the state, then by history itself. The story was told and retold, adapted and shared until it became part of the land itself. And in 2024, on a warm summer afternoon, a young woman, 26 years old, climbed the trail to the old stone cabin. She had driven from Seattle, needed a break from her life, from the pressure of a relationship that felt more like imprisonment than partnership. Her boyfriend wanted her to quit her job to move cities to become someone she was not. She reached the cabin now, a state historical site, and read the plaques that told the story. Emma Warren sold by her mother. Caleb Stone, a mountain man with a dark past. Their marriage, their children, their legacy. There was a quote on the final plaque attributed to Emma herself, recorded by one of her students in 1915. "I was sold for $21, but I bought myself back with mountains. I chose freedom. I chose love. I chose life. And anyone, no matter their circumstance, can make the same choice. It is never too late to choose yourself." The young woman stood there for a long time reading those words again and again. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. "Mom, I need to tell you something. I am not moving to Austin with Daniel. I am staying here. I am choosing myself." A pause as her mother responded. "I know you like him. I like him too, but not enough to give up who I am. And if Emma Stone could make that choice in 1875 with no money and no support, I can make it now with a job and friends and options." She hung up feeling lighter than she had in months. She looked at the old cabin one more time, at the wildflowers that still grew by the door, descendants of the ones Emma had planted over a century ago. "Thank you," she whispered to the mountains, to the ghosts, to the woman whose story had given her permission to write her own. The wind sighed through the pines, and somewhere in the sound might have been a woman's voice, might have been approval, might have been nothing but wind. But it was enough. Emma Warren was sold for $21 in 1875. She became a mother of triplets, a teacher of hundreds, a woman who proved that worth is not assigned but claimed. The mountains remember her name. The wind carries her story. And anyone who listens carefully enough can still hear the echoes of a choice made long ago that changed everything.